Raptors Weekly for the week of January the 26th. Joining me today is Tim Chisholm. Tim, what's up?
How you doing?
Not bad, man. I moved this weekend, so I didn't have a lot of chance to check out the basketball action. I barely caught the Detroit game, but offline we just talked about and I asked you who the star of the game was, and you said?
DJ Augustin.
He's always the star of the game when he plays the Raptors, isn't he?
Well, you're getting to the point now where just about every single starting point guard, just their eyes light up whenever they see the Raptors. It's like a night after night thing. No Brandon Jennings. All right, so the DJ Augustin will score all of the points for Detroit. 35 points for DJ Augustin.
Yeah, and in his time with the Raptors, were you somewhat surprised at how shitty he was? I thought we cut him too loose last season, where I thought if we gave him a little longer leash, he might have produced something. It just seemed his cut seemed a bit premature because he was a bit of a proven point guard in Charlotte.
He was in Charlotte, but the thing was he had that awful year in Indiana. He has since proved himself, but when the Raptors first picked him up, I was a little surprised. But I guess it went to that idea that when Ujiri had taken over, he said the only people that are going to sit at the end of the bench are young guys, and at the time they had Cherry and they had Julius Stone, and so Augustin got the cut. But yeah, he looked a little foolish about it after Thibodeau made him the world's greatest backup point guard.
Yeah, I guess if you put Augustin, Julian Stone, and Dwight Bikes all in a line, the only thing positive you could say about the other two is that they're younger.
Yeah, and that was it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's, at the time too, when they made the cut, they thought they were kind of going into the toilet. So
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Other than that, this game apparently has seen DeMar DeRozan come back to somewhat normal terms.
Well, it was nice to see him finally getting to the line. It's one of those sorts of things where I understand when you've had an injury, not necessarily wanting to hurl your body at people looking to rip you out of the air. But if the Raptors are going to play as ISO heavy an attack as they're going to do, he's got to get to the line. So, 10 trips to the line this game. You just hope it continues now going forward against Indiana.
And Jonas Valanciunas is 9 for 15 in this game. Detroit seems to be one of those teams where you on paper you're like he might be up tough against Monroe and Drummond, but he always ends up having really good games. And today he's 20 points, 11 rebounds. I'd say he owned that matchup against the Detroit Bigs again.
Yeah, he did. It's funny too because he's not one of those guys that will always step up big against that sort of competition that should bring him out. It's completely random. I don't know what it is about the Detroit front line. Monroe doesn't play any defense, but he's not the one guarding Valanciunas. It was mostly Drummond, and it was mostly Drummond just being late in his sets. It's really peculiar, but good thing that he knows how to take advantage of it.
Yeah, I'm totally. Talk about JB for a second. You've seen him live for more than half a season now. He's had his ups and downs, although I'd say it's mostly been ups. Anything surprising about JB's game this year coming into the season? Expectations versus actuals?
You know what? The surprising thing for me has actually been that he's played very much like I sort of thought he might, which I know shouldn't sort of be a surprise, but coming off of the summer that he had at the Olympics, and we talked a bit about it, or not at the Olympics, at the World Championships, and we sort of talked about it a bit then, but his poise on offense has really impressed me, and it did manage to translate to the NBA level. And in the last few games, he's become really sort of loose with the ball. But on the whole, he doesn't really rush his offense. He doesn't really panic. He still needs to learn to pass, still needs to learn how to play basically any semblance of team defense. But I don't know. The poise that he plays with has actually been really, really impressive. And if you sort of set it against the other third-year guy on the team in Terrence Ross, it's really refreshing because he's clearly gotten the consistency of the NBA game a lot better than Ross has.
And I guess that is partially owing to his background before he came to the NBA because he played professionally overseas, and Ross hasn't had that chance yet. And so that probably plays a role here.
I think it probably plays a big role. In addition to that, Valanciunas plays in these massive summer tournaments and whatnot, and I'm sure there's a factor that plays a part that the team is clearly more invested in Valanciunas going forward than Terrence Ross. Casey is giving Ross minutes over James Johnson and all the rest of all that noise, but Valanciunas is implanted in that starting lineup, and I don't know what it would take at this point to pull him out.
The second half is what it takes to pull him out.
Yeah, the fourth quarter, exactly. Yeah. But for whatever reason, I think that probably plays a bit on Terrence Ross's confidence, and so for now, Valanciunas sort of reaps the benefit of it.
How do you think Casey has used Valanciunas so far? There's been a lot of talk about not giving him enough minutes, especially when Casey goes for smaller lineups. In the fourth quarter, you see, despite Valanciunas going, 13 for 14 in some games, he'll get like one touch in the fourth quarter and play 3 minutes. What is the rationale behind that? Like, is Casey on purpose or making a conscious decision to play him less minutes later, or is he seeing something in the game where he sees Valanciunas may not be a good fit of that situation? And what is that situation? Because I haven't had a chance to understand that.
I mean, it is a fit thing, I think. And this isn't necessarily me agreeing with it. But if you don't have confidence that your guy is going to be able to make the necessary defensive reads down the stretch of the game, and it's not even making the defensive play at this point. It's really just the reads. I mean, as a big body, you'd figure he'd have certain advantages over a Tyler Hansbrough or a Patrick Patterson. But Casey, at least at this point, feels that those guys have a better shot at reading what's happening on the court with the other team better than Valanciunas has. And there's a few times even in this game where Valanciunas got kind of stuck in transition and ended up having to foul Greg Monroe. And it's these sort of little nuances where one-on-one he's not bad defensively, but as soon as you put him in these team situations, now the counter argument to that is you sort of want to put him in those positions every once in a while so that he learns how to play in those pressure pack situations. But I understand from Casey's perspective, especially right now when the team is struggling so much to play consistent basketball, why you'd want to say, all right, for 3 quarters, go out, score your points, get your 20 points, get your rebounds. But until I trust that you're going to be able to make those defensive reads at the end of the game, I just can't play you. Again, it's not necessarily an agreement on it, but I'm pretty sure that's where the thinking comes from.
All right, I'll buy that argument. But by that same token, how come he's trusting Terrence Ross, who's horrible at defense, over James Johnson, who's terrific at defense and great at making reads? Could you explain that?
Well, I mean, that's a totally valid point. And the same thing applies to Grievous Vasquez. I mean,
guarding Tyreek Evans with the game on the line. Yes.
Yeah,
continue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not a consistent application of that principle. And so I think that's where the fans are getting justifiably frustrated. If it was something that was applied across the board where you said, if I can't trust you defensively, you don't play, and that was applied to all 15 guys equally, you say, all right, it is what it is. He's consistent about it. There's a logic to it. Fine. But it's not applied consistently. And I'm not entirely sure what it is about Valanciunas that has him hesitant in the way that he is to play and where he might not be some of these other guys. And I think Ross is actually the best example because it's not like he has more years in the league. Ross was a better man-on-man defender at times last year, but clearly that's gone. The team reads were never there last year, and they're still not there. And yeah, I don't necessarily know what the logic is behind that at that point, especially because I think he has to understand that that's one of the reasons why people are so consistently second-guessing his rotations.
Well, I was going to talk about Kyle Lowry and the All-Star, but let's continue this thread and talk about Dwane Casey as a coach. He's after the hot start. December was great. Things kind of cooled off after the road trip, and his offense got a little exposed. And the criticism against it is that it's very individualistic, where you're really relying on individual brilliance to get you points, and sometimes that results in a lot of me ball. And with guys like Lou Williams, when the shot goes in, it's great, but when they miss, it looks pretty bad. What is Dwane Casey's offense right now? Is it really, guys, we're relying on these couple of guys to create shots for themselves first and everybody else later, or is it something more sophisticated than that? Because right now, it just with DeRozan's return, it's looking a little better, but what do you make of the criticism that it's too reliant on individual players making plays?
I think it's valid to an extent. I mean, there's definitely too much iso ball. I think that the team has gotten incredibly predictable, but there's also the sense that, and this is actually what my piece is about tomorrow, is that the team as a whole has been sort of once through the league, and people are just now scouting them better. They have a better sense of how to stop them. They understand now that these guys are going to go for one-on-one plays first, and so they're really playing the passing lanes heavily, which is why the turnovers have skyrocketed. They know that they're going to look for threes, and they're closing out on them better, which is why Patterson's threes have sort of somewhat disappeared. It's partly the fact that the offense has been kind of exposed once through, and they have not demonstrated any counterpunch. That said, I think that what Casey's done with these guys, because obviously the design of the team is a lot of isolation guys, DeRozan, Lou Williams, even Lowry and Vasquez, Terrence Ross. I mean, these are not guys that are necessarily going to ever fit in an Atlanta Hawks system. But I think what he's done is he's given them a certain amount of latitude to say, these are our plays. This is what we like to run. But if you see an opportunity to score one-on-one, it's yours to take. And I think what he's realized in the last few weeks is that these guys, as the team has started to struggle, have started to assume a greater and greater and greater propensity to break the plays, to say, oh, I see my chance here, or I'll do this, I'll get the team on my back. And it's veered now far too heavily. And I believe that part of what his frustration was after the last game, when he kind of ripped the team in the aftermath, was that guys are now too frequently freelancing, and guys are not doing the things that they know. And because it's harder to play in a system. It's harder to make those reads every time down the court and be moving without the ball and to hope the ball comes back to you. That's harder basketball. These guys were taking the easy way out by overreading the need for ISO ball. And I think that they were better against Detroit in trying to keep the ball moving and to try to put more plays in action. I mean, there was actually an end of quarter play where Lou Williams didn't just jack a three. I mean, you could see that there's a little bit of a pressure on the team to make those reads better. But I worry that Casey's counterpunch isn't there yet, and I'm not sure that he knows what it is.
The counterpunch definitely isn't there yet, because we're seeing the same offense in game 40 that we saw in game 1. But explain to me, or try to explain to me, what's up with the pick and roll? Because when I look at our roster, I see two guys in Valanciunas and Amir Johnson who have shown in the past that they're really good at executing that play. Before we were blessed with a point guard in Jose Calderon, which was great at making the pass, but now we have Vasquez, who, despite what you might think of him defensively, is a very capable point guard of running that play and has good size, which really helps. But the Raptors continue to be one of the bottom third in the league in even attempting to run the pick and roll. Like, is that an oversight? Or
I can't imagine it's design. I hope it's not designed, because you're right. It really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, it's a very odd structure in the team. I've been mostly surprised. Although, it applies to Amir too, but I've been mostly surprised that they haven't tried to use Valanciunas more in that situation, because coming into the league, that was supposed to be his pet offensive move, was the pick and roll. But no, it's true. But Amir Johnson was bread and butter was pick and roll basketball when Calderon is here. So I don't entirely understand the reluctance to run it. But I think what ends up happening is the team may set up a single screen, but guys tend to then just use them for isolation ball. And again, I wonder how much of that now is these players who start reverting to habit and are reverting to, oh, I've got this momentary bit of openness because of the screen. Let me see first if I can exploit that before I throw the pass. And that's all the defense needs in order to recover from the pick. But I still think that the team, from coaching staff down to the roster, needs to find a way to utilize it better.
Now that the listener has actually heard this, just try to take a look at the Raptors offense when they run it and see how many times a high screen is used and there is a possibility of a pass back to the big, and how often that pass isn't made, or the point guard even looks that direction but decides not to make the pass for whatever reason it is. And you'll notice it happens 2 or 3 times a quarter. It's at a very, very high rate.
And the only thing that I could wonder about it, and you're right in that this does not apply to Vasquez, because he should be able to make that pass regardless. But I think that you sometimes end up in situations where the ball handler doesn't come off the screen at an angle that adequately puts him in a position to create the passing lane. One criticism against Valanciunas, and this is, I don't think he comes off those plays creating passing lanes for himself either, or presenting an adequate target for his point guards. But that's where you all start to wonder, is that where Lowry's size becomes a problem? Is that where DeRozan's lack of instinctual passing comes into play? I mean, he's a much better passer this year, but I feel like he's done a much better job of making the reads that exist within the offense rather than being able to sort of feel the passes like some of the better playmakers do in the NBA. But so that's why I sort of think what I sort of think it comes down to that. But again, I say all of that, but the Grievous Vasquez one invalidates that. He should be able to come off of these and make these passes. He can see over almost every other point guard defender, and he has the touch to make these reads. So yeah, I don't know.
And surprisingly, one of the guys that does make those instinctual reads is Terrence Ross. Like when you give him a ball at a point forward situation, sometimes he'll make a pass that totally surprises you because even you didn't see it coming, and it's a perfect bounce pass heading to the rim, and you're like, why doesn't he do this more often? So before we take a break and talk about Kyle Lowry's All-Star selection, let's briefly touch on Patrick Patterson, whose role, in my view, has changed from last year. Where this year you see him taking a lot more threes. I think close to, I don't know what the stat is, but it's like I think 40% or 50% of his shots actually are threes, whereas last year they were around like 27%. That's a big shift in what a person's role was year to year. Last year, I thought he was really good at moving without the ball and getting into areas where he, like we just talked about, making the reads of how to get open. And this year, I see his role being shifted towards almost just a 3-point shooter. Is that like, have you noticed that transformation?
Oh, I mean, yeah. I mean, statistically, he's actually over 50% of his shots have been threes this year. And I think though, in the last few weeks, you've seen this offense try to give him more opportunities in the mid-post, around the basket, some post-ups. And I think that's why his rebounding numbers have started to climb back up. Or not back up for the first time. He's never been a great rebounder. But I think that – and it's the same thing. I mean, Casey has tried to make just about every one of the power forwards he's ever had on this team into a 3-point shooter. And so once he got a guy like Patterson who had developed himself naturally into that kind of shooter, yeah, I think he overplayed that hand. I think that he saw Patterson as a different look from what you get from Amir in the starting lineup. But as Amir has really started to break down, I think he's noticed that he actually needs the versatility that exists in Patterson's game. Because I think, yeah, he went too far in the direction of using him as a floor spacer, that as soon as guys caught on to it and they started running him off the 3-point line, he basically disappeared from the offense. And he's far too talented and he's far too expensive to be that marginalized. And so it's actually kind of nice, I think, that in the last 4 or 5 games, they've tried to find other ways to get him involved on offense beyond just parking himself behind the 3-point line.
Yeah, shift in the right direction at least.
Yeah, we'll see if it lasts.
Yeah, and we'll shift towards a break and come back and talk about Kyle Lowry.
Raptors look for their first lead of the night. Shot clock is off.
We're looking at Lou Williams here against Memphis.
7 times in the period. 4 seconds for Lou Williams.
Oh, he takes a 3.
3 in the lead.
Misses.
And that is kind of a odd possession to just hold it and then put up a 27-footer. We'll take it. Yeah, Lou Williams with the 3-point miss.
So that was the Memphis announcers when Lou Williams took a the 1-4 clear out 3-pointer and missed. What do you think of that play?
I think it's lazy. I mean, it's getting to the point now where every team is so tuned into the fact that he's not even going to try to drive it. You know, it's already bad enough when you basically have resigned your entire end of quarter play to just being, here's one guy with the ball. That's bad enough. But it's at this point now where everyone knows he's just going to try to take a 3-pointer, not even trying to get fouled. He's just going to dribble, and then shoot. So, I mean, I think I'm glad that other announcers are laughing about it because it's a ridiculous way to end quarters.
But hey, in the week we did get some good news, and
guards in the NBA. He is joined in the backcourt.
Wow,
Kyle Lowry.
That well-deserved Kyle Lowry.
First time in his 9th season. He trailed D-Wade by 100,000 votes on the last update, and in an 11-day span, passed him and nailed down a starting spot. 20 points, 5 rebounds, 8 assists, all career highs for Kyle Lowry.
Kyle Lowry makes the Raptors with the NBA starting lineup for the East. Congratulations to Kyle Lowry. Tim, how'd you feel of this? Well-deserved?
Oh, yeah. I think it's great. He's one of these sorts of guys where – and the Raptors haven't really had a player that combined these things very many times in their history. But he's that guy that's not only their best player, but is also the engine that makes that whole team go. And it's just really cool to actually sort of see – in the sort of reascension of the franchise to have that rewarded like that. And look, in the long run too, it's kind of nice for the team that they have demonstrated what can happen if they activate a country's worth of voters to try to get their guys into the All-Star team. I mean, that's not going to be a bad recruiting tool in the summers to come.
I found it interesting that in the West, where a guy who had no business being into the All-Star game, Kobe Bryant, got voted over James Harden, who totally deserved to be there. And in the East, the opposite kind of happened, where Kyle Lowry, the fans did the right thing in the East and the wrong thing in the West.
Yeah, the validity of the fan vote will be, I think, debated so long as there's a fan vote. But I think it's sort of nice when, I guess, the right guys go. I mean, I don't mind Kobe getting voted in because at the end of the day, it is that sort of, you want to see the biggest players in the game. And I also don't like James Harden. But yeah, at the end of the day, whenever it sort of like benefits the Raptors, I mean, they so rarely get the opportunity to have a player worth voting into the All-Star game in the first place. It's nice when those little windows align and the fans actually make it happen.
So do you think this could be a possible recruiting tool that Ujiri could use in future free agent recruitment, where like, hey, look, we actually have a support of a country, we can get behind you like this, get you into All-Star games? Is this something that moves the needle in that area?
Oh, not only do I think it can, I think that was part of the design. I think that they took the opportunity to say, here's a guy that, you actually maybe have – you couldn't do this with most players. I mean, Lowry was sort of a unique situation, but I think the team knew to double down on that push because I think they knew the value in that going out to free agents, where with one item you could immediately invalidate anybody that says, yeah, but will I be as popular in Toronto? Will that really do anything for my brand? Immediately now that's invalidated. And that's why I actually think that there was a lot of foresight in terms of making the push that the team did to get Lowry to the All-Star game by a fan vote.
And the Canadian dollar is dropping, so that's always a positive to get to playing in Canada. Great all season. He's been terrific. Nothing really negative you can say about him, except that I've noticed that his defense against Philly as well, even against Detroit, against Augustin, still remains an issue. And I'm surprised that under a coach like Dwane Casey, who's so defensive-minded, that we haven't seen individual improvement in players in their defensive ability over like this 2-3 year span. Like, I was really hoping that he would come in and forget about from a systemic point of view where he might improve the team defense, but individually, I haven't seen any steps, let alone leaps in individual players, including Kyle Lowry.
Yeah, the Lowry one is disappointing because, he sort of came in with such a reputation for defense. But I think what is happening right now, because it's true. I mean, we said it at the beginning of the podcast now. It feels like every opposing point guard now just goes off against the Raptors. It doesn't matter where they sit on the pecking order. But I wonder how much of that can be attributable to sort of dead legs from Lowry. Not an excuse necessarily, because I still think that you can better position your guy to be funneled where you need him to go into the team schemes, which isn't really entirely happening. But yeah, I do agree with you. I think that when you start talking especially about guys like Ross and Valanciunas, that you do sort of – you see – Casey's defensive acumen may have a lot more to do with schemes rather than development. I mean, I'm impressed with DeRozan's defensive improvement because he was horrible for a very long time, and he's fairly passable now. But
yeah, Lowry definitely is. He is getting killed in the minutes category. He's the Raptor with by far the most minutes played this season. Obviously, DeRozan's like well behind because of his injury, but Kyle Lowry is so far ahead. The second one is not even close. And just to give you an example, let's talk about the Philly game for a bit. Without Lowry, we lose that game. Like we needed him to play 36 minutes against Philly to beat them by 5 points in the end, and he had to score 17 of the last 21 points at home. Home for him because he's from Philly. That shouldn't I don't think that is sustainable for the whole season, and certainly not for the playoffs. So I think we need to find some sort of fix, whether that fix being DeRozan coming back from injury and getting into his groove. Maybe that's what the answer is. But the current offense, the way it stands, and the pressure we put on Kyle Lowry, I just don't see it sustaining and giving us playoff success.
No, I agree. And it wasn't as though Lowry was really playing less minutes or less importance when DeRozan was healthy at the start of the year. I mean, the team puts so much on his shoulders. And I think that they had assumed, and this is a guess, but I think that they had assumed that Vasquez may have settled down a bit coming out of a contract year. You know, you don't need to prove yourself. You don't have that impulse to necessarily be trying to make plays that aren't there to try to demonstrate a value. I mean, you're there, you're paid, you're in good shape, but he still isn't quite reliable enough to take large chunks of Lowry's minutes in those games, in against your Phillies, against your Indiana's, Milwaukee's. I mean, whoever, whatever your mid to bottom tier teams are. I think that and I think that's one of the reasons why they paid Vasquez so much money, was to be able to maybe reduce some of Lowry's minutes, and it just hasn't happened. And you can't really put Lou Williams in a point guard position. So, I mean, it's tough because you can't really bring someone in without messing up whatever's going on with Vasquez. So I don't exactly know what the solution is, because I don't know that even once DeRozan fully regains his form, that the team will be in a position to do much to shave Lowry's minutes heading into the back half of the season.
So, on a positive note, we are 29 and bloody 15, which is amazing at this point of the season, and we have won 3 of 4, which we haven't done in January up until now. And the win against Milwaukee, it was a gritty win after a very disappointing loss at home to New Orleans on a back-to-back, so that was positive. Memphis, I thought we played really well, had a chance to win that game, but just a couple of coaching decisions here and there could have turned out better. So it was one of those moral victories, but in a loss kind of deal. And then Philly we eked out, and Detroit we obviously beat today. And Detroit's actually, I'd say, a decent win. Yeah. So 3 of 4 we've won. At this point, I'm hoping that up next we got Indiana, Sacramento, Brooklyn, and then a big one against Washington. If the Raptors in mid-December would easily sweep Indiana, Sacramento, and Brooklyn. The way the team is right now, how do you see those 3 games playing out?
They should still sweep them. I mean, the only thing that gives me pause is the travel about it. But even still, I think that they know, after the way that the game went in Philly, that the way in which you keep your record healthy is by beating those teams. I actually think, this might be reading too much into it, but I think after a game like Philly, you're almost kind of secretly happy it went the way it went if you're the coaching staff, because you got the win, so you're fine. And yet you can still look at it and treat it with the team like a loss, and really remind the guys that even against these really crappy teams, you still have to show up and play basketball. And setting up this trip like that. And you're right. I mean, the team is in incredible shape, and it is definitely not a sky is falling kind of moment. It's apt to nitpick right now because they had started so well, and there's an impulse to want to figure out why they're not steamrolling teams like they did at the start of the season. But no, I mean, they're in great shape, and I think that things will settle. I don't know that this is the starting lineup that they're going to be able to keep, and I don't know that putting Ross back into the starting 5 is the way to go either. But on the whole, things I think are far more positive than they are negative, despite some of the blips in January.
Yeah, and at this point, the standings are kind of taking somewhat of a firm shape where you have Atlanta 7.5 games ahead. I don't think anybody's going to catch them at this point. Toronto's second, tied with Washington. But then two teams that were supposed to be 1-2, Chicago and Cleveland, are right now in 4 and 5. And then you got Milwaukee at 6, who's fairly easy to handle, and then you got Miami at 7. So, finishing second, which would mean facing Miami, that's a tough playoff matchup. So the Raptors have to be careful on where they kind of finish, because despite being maybe the second best team in the East, they might get a really tough matchup in a weak East, which is really ironic because you're not supposed to get that if you're in the top half of the East.
Well, it's such a wonky conference like that, but it's sort of what happened to them last year, having to go up against Brooklyn. You kind of got a really crappy draw for a team without a super duper star type of player that the Raptors are, going up against a really heavily veteran team. I mean, there are landmines all over the playoffs for a team like the Raptors, and if things shake out in a weird way, I mean, they may have to go up against like Cleveland in the first round. If it ends up as a 4 or 5, although I think Cleveland will probably end up out of that. But then again, it could be Washington you have to go up against in the first round if you're in a 4 or 5. So it's a very, very, very dicey proposition, but so is trying to manipulate your playoff standing.
I'm not suggesting that. I'm just suggesting that in the East, like if you look at right now, like even we've lost to Charlotte at home, I think. So the only team in the top 8 other than the Raptors is Milwaukee, who I would feel like somewhat confident going against in a playoffs. The rest is just, it's not easy. You almost kind of hope Brooklyn makes it so we can beat them.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny about how you kind of are now going to start watching the whole bottom half of the East to see how all that stuff shakes out. But it's also now sort of on this team to finally stop putting these boogeyman fears in the minds of the fans. Because for so many years they've been, they've gotten out of the first round once. There's always a reason why they've been either beat or out and out trounced by their first round opponent, and it's sort of time now for the team to say, it's not going to really matter who we're going up against. We are not going to lose because we have some particular mismatch like Joe Johnson or Dwight Howard or whomever. Like, they've got to start finding that way to push through regardless of who their opponent is.
You can't let the mismatch everybody knows exists beat you, because that just screams of poor preparation.
Agreed. Totally agree.
So let's take one final break, and we come back, we'll talk about Dwane Casey and I don't know, whatever else is on my list.
Excellent.
Welcome back to the final part of Raptors Weekly. So 2 topics to tackle in this final part. The first one being Dwane Casey a little bit. Some talk in the comment section, especially that the Raptors have done tremendous things this year. They got 29 wins, which is fantastic, and Dwane Casey has done a phenomenal job of getting the effort out of these guys, getting them to where they are today. However, is he the type of coach which can take you to the next level, or do you at some point, just like you upgrade players, you need to upgrade your coach so you can actually have playoff success? Tim, is it too early to even make a judgment call on that topic?
It's too early, but it's a valid question. It was a valid question of Sam Mitchell, whatever it was, 7 years ago or so, 8 years ago. And it's a valid question now. You're probably about a year away and a first round exit or a really ugly second round exit from the conversation being on the front burner. But as a team is going to look to grow, just like you said, just like you would have to sort of look at the roster and the makeup of the roster and the possibly the veteran makeup of the roster, you have to be aware of how the coach is performing, because when you're going from being a really crappy team to a good team, what you're really looking from your coach is development and setting a tone and developing a personality for your team. But when you start looking at trying to get second round, third round to the finals, now you're really looking at an ability to manage a game. And I don't know at this point if we look at Dwane Casey and say, well, that's clearly a strength. I'm not quite as far as some people are in saying it's an out-and-out weakness, but I'm definitely not going to say, well, that's the guy you want on the sidelines coaching against a particularly good X's and O's coach at the other end.
Well, if Scotty Brooks can last this long in the league, Dwane Casey certainly has a chance.
Well, yeah, and again, it could just as much be that, the coach needs the reps just like the players do. And, to give him a couple of years, maybe he figures all that out. The thing is you never know, and that's always a scary thing when you're a GM.
So it's a final thing to do. Let's talk about the roster a little bit heading into the February trade deadline. Assuming the Raptors' goal is to actually win a playoff round, maybe two. Like what areas on this roster do you think right now need to be strengthened the most? I know it's difficult to construct trades on just out of thin air, but positionally, is there some aspect of the team that you would like to see strengthened?
Small forward.
Really?
Easily.
Even though James Johnson is a pretty good small forward, getting 9 minutes against Detroit.
I wasn't thrilled on Johnson coming into the season, and I've been perfectly impressed with him, but I still think he's a backup. And it's just the
So if he's a backup, what does that make Ross?
Well, exactly. Ross for me, in year 3 when you're regressing, and he is regressing, there's no point in his game that I look at right now and I say, at least this one area is clearly better than it was last year.
Okay, are you talking about on the court or on NBA on PlayStation?
No, on the court. He's a guy that I just sort of I just want some. Okay. You go down the list. He's not playing good individual man-on-man defense. He's not playing good team defense. He's not a good passer. He's not rebounding. He's not getting to the free throw line. Still can't handle the ball very well. You sort of go down that list, and you'd like to have somebody that's more than just a floor spacer who isn't really big enough to guard opposing small forwards. And I just want to say, too, that I don't think he's a bad player. I think he's just a bad fit with this team and where this team is going.
Why though? I don't get that. I don't buy that. Either he's a bad player and he just sucks on every team, but I just don't see why he's a bad fit, because his skill set or supposed skill set is exactly what the Raptors need. A guy who can space the floor, a guy who can supposedly play some defense, and a guy who can supposedly handle the ball a little bit here and there. On paper, he's a perfect Raptors fit. It's just that the only thing he's capable of doing right now is shoot threes, and that's 37%, which is not too bad. So I don't know if it's a fit thing. Either he's a good player or he's not.
Well, the thing is, the reason why I guess, and maybe, good players is probably a bit strong considering that I just ripped apart, about every basketball skill he has. But I do think that there would be opportunities on other teams, like a Phoenix, for example, doing sort of what Gerald Green does for Phoenix, I think would hide his limitations and accentuate his capabilities better than what's happening in Toronto. But for me, with Ross, it really just comes down to raw size. If you're designing a team that's going to have to go into the playoffs and you're going up against teams that have big, small forwards, it's a constant mismatch. And for me, if all he's really giving you is putting him in the starting lineup for you is 3-point shooting, I just think that he's taking too much off the table to make that work for me.
What do you think he's going to be in 5 years?
Where do you think he's going to be?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I don't know. My first instinct, weirdly, was to say
China.
DeMar. Well, I think he'll be. No, I think he'll stay in the NBA, and I think that part of his problem and why there might be a slight lack of skill development is because he's never really had to kill himself to stay in the rotation.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And so I think that might be playing into it a little bit. I just think that he's a bench player. I think that he's a bench player on a team that needs an athletic 3-point shooting two guard and that fits within sort of their team structure. I don't think he fits on a team like an Atlanta or San Antonio. Teams that make their hay with passing. I don't think that's going to be his thing, but maybe teams that get out on the break like to shoot lots of threes. I could see him having a fit there, but that's just not what the Raptors do.
Like, I think he could be a Cephalosha type player if he straightens out his defense at some point, because he's 6'7" as well. So I don't necessarily think Ross's height is what's holding him back.
No, it's not height, but like size, just that raw size. But yeah, go ahead.
No, I get you. Like, I think Ross is what, 200, and Cephalosha is like about 220. So I don't know. Ross is kind of boring. So let's move on. So final point I want to talk about, a guy probably we haven't talked about on the pod all season, but I think he should get some daylight, is Bebe.
Okay.
BB. I don't know, Bebe. I don't know which one.
Yeah,
Lucas Nogueira. Lucas Nogueira is his name. Did you think he would contribute more, or did you know that he was basically 2 years from being 8 years away?
No, I thought he would play more, to be honest with you. I mean, especially in blowout situations. I'm surprised that he is a nightly scratch. Like, I mean, they've literally never played Steamsma. And I understand, having ready in deep reserve another big, but I don't know. I kind of thought that would have been Bebe. I thought that was sort of the shtick. And I mean, I coming into the season thought that he would at least be a guy that in blowout situations or when foul trouble hit, that they would be more inclined to go to him. But this is, I think, one of those situations where we don't get to sit there and practice. We don't get to sit in the coaches' meetings, and there's clearly a reason why they're doing it. And but it does surprise me. But I also think that part of that probably comes from the fact that we are so used to this team playing their young guys that there is an adjustment period for the viewer as well to actually have a team where it's almost more important to have minutes go to steady or more dependable veterans than to developing youth.
Yeah, he's making Austin Day look like a starter.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah. I think that about wraps it up, Tim, man. Thanks for taking the time out on a Sunday evening and talking Raptors. Yeah, we'll do it again soon. Meanwhile, the Raptors embark on a 4-game week. Again, let's look at the schedules. Indiana on Tuesday, back-to-back at home, Sacramento on Wednesday. Then we got Brooklyn Friday in Brooklyn, and the week rounds off against Washington. Quick call on the Washington game, just win-loss. It's in Washington, and it's on the second night of a back-to-back for the Raptors.
Yeah, I think Washington takes it, and I think John Wall may have like 105 points.
Oh, well, if DJ Augustin is any indication. And with that, we say goodbye.